planned to talk about both the opioid crisis and how they are the Usher family. It's the Sackler family, Sackler family. They're the same people, ultimately. And that they're not the only ones, but I plan to talk about that and also the ways that the rich make it so that you can't buy life-saving medication. So I'll just do a really brief overview of that. We've seen what's happened with insulin. We have articles in our blog that you can read about that are just really upsetting. And there's cancer fighting medications that are behind absurd paywalls. It's you live for what at that point, with the amount of money that they charge you to afford these medications. And many people die because they literally cannot. And additional inhalers, considering how polluted our world is becoming, how much asthma is directly impacted by pollution. My inhaler costs $125 per inhaler that I'm supposed to take every month. And that's just for one of them. I have two. One's an emergency that will save my life if I literally stop breathing. And one is a control inhaler and it's I'm lucky enough that some months I can afford that. But there are humans that cannot, absolutely. And life-saving medication specifically, it should be a crime in the way that there is some sort of punishment and responsibility taken for the companies that charge this absurd amount of money for medication, as well as just access to life-saving care. Our entire system is messed up. So it's there's no one thing that's happening. It's a big concoction of things that make all of this possible.
Just compounds, yeah.
Yeah. So it's that's one thing where it's the solution maybe isn't murder, obviously, because it's not just one person doing it.
Yeah.
There are so many individual people making choices that result in this. It's a smaller percentage than us, at the bottom. But it is still many, many humans self-serving and thinking of themselves, making these choices where they could stand up. What is her name? Oh my goodness. I know her. She's my favorite character in the show. Lenore?
Oh, Lenore?
Yeah. Who should
I know
have
you're talking about real people, because I was going to be Bezos' wife just doubled down her donations. That's someone who's great.
And that's kind of an allegory for the wife in the House of Usher. That's Lenore's mother. So we see there's people who do stand up and they do things that need to happen and use the money for good, but they're so few and far between. And that there's so many people who make choices with the hopes that they'll get to be the next Ushers, or that they can create that kind of wealth for their family and do so at the cost of literally every single person that they could possibly care about. So that's a problem. So as Gabe was talking about, the world of the House of Usher already exists. We live in it. The awful things, every single one of them, other than the fantastical horror things like bodies actually literally raining from the sky. These things happen every single day. We witness them play out on screen. They reflect what is actually happening in reality. So everyone has heard of someone or personally knows someone who's been addicted to a substance, whether that's pills, whether that's drugs in general, whether that's alcohol, whether that's cigarettes. There's so many harmful substances that can be purchased in our country and are actively pushed to be purchased in our country that everyone knows somebody who has been impacted by those things. But today we're specifically going to be talking about pills because that's the big thing in the Ushers. They are specifically marketing a pill called Ligodone that very much mimics Oxycontin or oxycodone. So essentially, the reason for this is, it's very complicated, but I watched all of the John Oliver Last Week Tonight episodes, which Gabe shared with me on opioids, and I read a few articles, but he kind of goes really into depth about the opioid crisis that has pushed across the country and how that has expanded and grown into the fentanyl crisis. And it started with Oxy, it grew into all these other drugs. And ultimately, it started with everything that happened in the 50s with the FBI and CIA. It started there, but it grew into this. So essentially, we're specifically pointing out companies like Purdue, who have a family that runs it that very much mimics the Ushers. There's actually a few people in that family that I can like directly compare to characters in the show. And essentially, this company, Purdue, in 1996 released a drug called Oxycontin or oxycodone with an aggressive, and if this was a dystopian novel, comical marketing campaign to push this drug heavily to doctors. This included fun hats, swing music CDs, and cute plushies wearing Oxycontin t-shirts.
That's crazy.
Yes. And then they would be giving them out to doctors like, hey, have you heard of this? Take my drug. Blah, blah, blah. And literally, so the president of this company would force his way into, I'll get into that later, but he forces his way into drug rep sales. He would go with them to sell the drugs to the doctors. And they had wrote an email and they're like, can you please make him stop? We want him not to be with us. He's messing it up.
Yeah.
This rich man. But okay. Additionally, and probably the most impactful were the testimony of videos from patients speaking on how the drug changed their lives. And the first interview speaking about their basically response to starting Oxycontin as a drug. The woman in the video says she has not missed a day of work, which capitalism loves, since starting the medication. And then also included more meaningful impacts like being able to keep up with her grandkids. We find out years later, it's a tragedy that same woman became addicted to the medication and almost lost everything. Wow. I believe they did that one where they do the interview and it's an hour. 60 minutes.
60 minutes. Where are they now?
Yeah, exactly. So the videos were intentionally used to alleviate fears many people had surrounding taking such a strong drug, because Oxycontin is a very strong drug, and it was used to dispel worry. And the tragedy here is that not only did this grandma get addicted to this medication, but 2 other participants in the video testimonials, there were 6, 2 of them died. And the rest for the most part, were linked and proven to have been addicted to the medication until they eventually were able to get off of it or didn't and died. So the only thing that saved this grandma in this video was losing her health insurance so that she could not get any more Oxycontin, even if she wanted to, because she had lost her job. There is a cycle of damage here that is multifaceted. All of our basic human needs have a cost. So we need money to live. We need a job to get money. We need to maintain a job. In order to maintain a job, we need to be physically and mentally capable of work. If we are ill or in pain, we lose work or could lose our jobs because we're missing hours because we have to stay home or call out because we're in pain. If we lose our jobs, we lose our ability to care for ourselves through housing, food, and medical insurance. There is no infrastructure to receive the people who end up in that category who need help. Because to be disabled is a death sentence. Disability is widely underfunded. I know 2 people personally who cannot qualify for it because it's so difficult to qualify for it. They treat you like you're a liar the entire time. And when you actually need it, there's no infrastructure in place that actually supports people who are disabled. And they get so little money actually from the government that it's not sustainable to live off of anyway.
Yeah. And any of the care that they get can be really dehumanizing and takes away any autonomy in their lives as well. It's okay, either you fully can take care of yourself and you do this, or you need our help, and that means you can't do anything yourself.
Yeah. So many disabled people are forced to work without support because they cannot qualify for disability as well, and at the threat of homelessness and death. So now that we know that homelessness is considered a crime to which it will be jailed for and forced to do labor for free, whether or not you can or not, knowing all that and then being told there's a medication that will make it so that you no longer hear the signals from your body that prevent you from working. Literally any human could become addicted to that because it's literally the only thing. It's a Band-Aid that allows you to continue to participate in the system. Because
if you're not competing in the system, then you're worthless.
And you're dead, literally. So there are so many factors that made this drug so impactful in that it was given too widely. And then it's a Band-Aid for all these problems. There are lots of people getting injured on the job, hurt on the job, hurt in general. And then they're not supported. Their only route is to take this medication that will eventually lead to being addicted. It's a whole thing. So it's teaching you to ignore the signals from your body. And because the system because in the system is literally life-saving until it's not. So you essentially are solving pain. You're not solving the problem that's causing the pain. You're giving it a Band-Aid. So to capitalism, this is the perfect solution because it requires the government to spend the least amount of money. It is the most efficient way for them to spend money is to get population as addicted to things that will make them literally have to work more and have no connection to their bodies in order to work more, until like they ultimately cannot anymore. And at that point, good, they'll die. That's what they think. Ultimately.
That's why it's like, I stand by this. I think Brave New Worlds really is a spot on dystopia.
Yeah. So ultimately, it is super intentional and manipulative of these companies. That's why I say it's like a multifaceted thing. Like these people at the top, this company, the Sackler family, caused the start, you know. They made this medicine, they marketed it so heavily. They blatantly lied to people saying it wasn't addictive when it was. They had evidence that it was. But in addition to that, the system of the world, we had just seen Reaganomics like really start to like hit, and people were really facing economic hardship. And like there was so much happening to devalue the infrastructure that received people who needed help during that time right before this epidemic of drugs, that it like literally compounded together into this like perfect storm. In addition, videos marketing the drug in the 90s said that less than 1% of patients became addicted to opioids, which we now know is a lie, but which at the time was misleading because the company was paying doctors to speak on what addiction was. Similar to what we see in the House of Usher, the company had doctors on their payroll tasked with pushing this medication and benefiting the company. They had this doctor named Alan Spanos coined a new phrase called pseudo-addiction. That's why I said they had marketing dollars. You know what I mean? Like they had a PR campaign around pushing this drug and not taking accountability for it. Very much like Camille Usher did. There's a lot of connection there. So he coined a phrase called pseudo addiction and said that it's when someone wants pain medication, not because they're addicted to it, because they need relief. And they're not addicted to drugs, but they are addicted to relief, which is as absurd as it sounds, because that's literally what addiction is. Like the idea being that they're not addicted, even though they're acting addicted and actually are just doing it because they need more oxy. The solution to the problem is more drugs. And that's not addiction. That's how we're helping them, you know, because these people just think they're addicted.
They just want to feel good.
Yeah. And it also fails to acknowledge that all drug use is in response to a need of some kind, whether it is to address pain or trauma or chemical imbalances. Like people don't just take drugs for no reason. Like it's because something's happening systemically and in their lives that makes that seem like a better option or the only option in this case, because they were literally giving it to people who like fell and got a scratch on their leg and they're like, well, you know, you could use some pain medication. Actually, can I get you some oxy? And they would give them oxy for like small injuries. And they were marketing it as like, you hurt your knee? Yeah, give them some oxy. You banged your wrist? Get them some oxy. Like it was really like considered like
you're a little
Tylenol.
Sad? Get them some oxy.
Yeah, it was literally like they were pitching it as if it was like Tylenol. You know what I mean? So people use drugs and become addicted to drugs for a reason. And the issue with this is that it is, as I said a few times now, is the reason that this works so well is because of everything that was happening societally. So an additional flaw with the system is that these doctors were prescribing this medication, and that is like a flaw within the medical industry as a whole. Doctors do not have the bandwidth to spend the amount of time that they actually need to spend with patients to accurately and thoughtfully provide care. Dr. House is a lie. There are not doctors who have like a team of other like help, like sitting in a patient for like hours, really working with individual patients and like helping them with a lot of time. The amount of times I've spent at a doctor, I spent more time waiting for a doctor than I actually am in and seeing a doctor. And that's because they don't have enough bandwidth. There's not enough doctors. And then also like they're basically shoved from person to person, so they cannot adequately and like thoughtfully provide care. And insurance companies make life-saving medications so expensive that patients can't afford them. And doctors are discouraged by insurance companies from giving diagnoses because then they have to pay for treatment. So you have like all these things happening, and it's all comes down to like individual decisions too. Like there's some doctors who would be like, no, I won't do that. But there were also lots of doctors like, I'm going to get a payback from Purdue, the Oxy company, for doing this. And, then I can send my kid to college. And they made the choice to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'm going to pay that college to send them to it anyway. So.
Yeah. Yep. So essentially, it's there's so many things at play. So it's kind of like that speech that Usher was making in the show where he's talking about like, you would think that I couldn't get these ancient Egyptian relics, but if I buy the company that oversees the protection of Egyptian relics, and then I also buy the museum, and I buy like this, that, and everything has a price. And that's literally what this is. If you're buying hospitals and like the FDA, like the companies that evaluate and protect these things, which I'll get into later, because there's literally companies whose job it was to like report if they were giving out too many addictive substances, and they failed expeditiously, likely because the illusion of choice. These companies own all these other companies. It's like a whole thing. So ultimately, I'm sorry, I'm getting like all over the place, but in the year 2000 alone, doctors had prescribed OxyContin in almost 6 million patients as a quick fix for any and all pain they had mentioned. By 2007, that's just in 1 year. By 2007, after people clearly caught on to what was happening, as millions of people were now addicted to OxyContin and drugs like it, functioning as a gateway to other drugs, they were sued for $634 million for blatantly lying to the American public about its addictiveness. Other companies like Cephalon paid an additional $444 million for pushing similar drugs. Another company called Insys was investigated for pushing a drug that contained fentanyl, which is now the big issue right now, which was originally only approved to support patients fighting cancer because it's 100 times more strong than morphine. And they did this by lying to insurance companies, saying patients had cancer that didn't have cancer so that the drug would be approved for non-cancer patients. So it's like in the show where they would have people sign the forms that didn't actually sign the forms. It's kind of like that. They did this with semantics. So ironically, one of the people I'm going to talk about later has a PhD in linguistics, which I think really plays a part in this moment, because these people, the Insys company, was able to get away with this for so long because they wouldn't affirmatively answer the questions from the insurance providers and would go off someone's like instinctive response to be like, means yes. So they would ask like, does this patient have cancer? And they would say, But because they didn't blatantly say yes or no.
That's so gross.
They were semantically, legally allowed to say that they didn't consent or say that they did.
That's so gross.
Isn't it? And she has a PhD.
How do you feel good doing that? How do you feel good doing that?
Yeah.
How do you feel like you're like, how do you leave the room and go, I'm the good person in that? That's
crazy. Honestly, I assume
you don't even think about it.
It's not even that. I think it's more like, how you have the companies, like one person makes the screws and the other person makes the steel, and then you have everyone so separated out that they don't even realize what they're doing. Yeah. I think it's probably more that, unless you're at the top making those decisions, which there are thousands, almost millions of emails and letters and whatever. Like they have all this stuff in writing, but I'll get into why we don't have public access to that. So similarly, when these lawsuits went through, the records would be sealed from the public, and companies like Purdue would claim no wrongdoing as a condition of the payout. So they'd be like, I will give you this money, but that means you cannot say that I did anything wrong. And all the evidence that you collected in this case has to be sealed, burned, thrown out, that you can never be brought up again or used against me.
Like a double jeopardy.
Yeah. The infrastructure to replace opioids in the YouTube series, well, it was on TV at one point, but the YouTube series on opioids, he basically goes on to talk about like how there's no infrastructure to replace what opioids created. So like they're giving millions of dollars, but like the solution to this and like the healing from this is so expensive, and it requires so many different industries to be impacted and so many different like services to be supported. Like it requires like the entire like every billionaire that exists to give their money so that we can solve all these societal problems. And that's not what's going to happen. So like $444 million is nothing in the grand scheme of what problem they've created. There's also, they were talking about like there's issues where there's not alternative options for pain really available. Many of them are not covered by insurance. And in specifically like rural areas, they don't have facilities for these kinds of care. So like physical therapies and other treatments. And if they do, as I said, they're not covered by insurance, or they're like the copays are so expensive that you really you're not able to qualify for anything else other than the drugs that they're offering. Disgustingly, these companies are also marketing additional drugs to address side effects of the opioids, like constipation. There are like videos of that where like it was a Super Bowl ad.
Yeah. They're like, let's alleviate the issues that you have from our drug with a new our drug.
Yeah. So they're profiting off of additional drugs that they're creating to address the concerns of the drug that's already actively harming people. It's really like, it feels like we're watching a show, but it's reality. So the three companies that also helped get these drugs people facing, and essentially were like, that's what I was talking about with like the museums, where like you buy the places that would stop you from doing the thing. There are three companies that were in charge of monitoring these drugs and like making sure that they report to the FDA and the government that like you're getting high orders of these addictive substances, but actively failed to do so. And they are Cardinal Health, McKesson, and AmerisourceBergen. So when called out on this, these three companies basically paid hush money of $30 million without claiming wrongdoing again. And without consequences, the company did even worse at reporting like any increase in orders, to the point where like there's like this small town that it was called Kermit, and they had 400 residents. This is what John was talking about in the video. He's like, there's 400 residents, and they were giving them an absurd amount of drugs, like to this one pharmacy that only had 400 residents in that town. They were giving them like all of the oxy in the world, like millions of oxy, and for these 400 people. In like 1 year, this person ordered, I think it was like 6 million.
That's crazy.
And like no one said anything. Like these companies that are supposed to monitor that and like be like, hey, actually we noticed like this pharmacy is getting like way too much. What are we doing here? They don't report it. Why? I don't have those answers, because the records that probably prove it are sealed and burned or whatever. So honestly, when I'm like thinking back to that one episode we did, They Cloned Tyrone, I'm like, where did they learn how to do this? The CIA or whatever. It's fine. It's not. But essentially, the FDA was like, and the government were like, what are you doing? You're supposed to be monitoring this. And they were like, shh, it's fine. Here's $30 million. That's enough, right? And then without companies, they did even worse. And in 2017, they paid an additional $150 million, being like, you know what, actually, you know, you're right. We thought we handled it. We didn't. Here's some more money. We didn't do anything wrong at all. You know, and it's still nothing in comparison to the revenue for 1 year. I think he went on to say that it was 1/1000th of their total revenue for the year was $150 million. So just like the Ushers, there was always a price to be paid to avoid accountability. There was always a way out. And that's what I'm going to talk about, the Sackler family, because like they're the same people. That's the people who own Purdue, and that's the company that like birthed the opioid crisis, and they're the same. They're the same family. I would not be shocked if the actors who played the Usher family watched the interviews and deposition and like those family members as like practice for their roles. So similarly to the Ushers, they would put their names on things like museums or universities or like royal gardens and stuff like that, but they would never put their name on the company. So they would actively hide that like they worked at Purdue. They named it Purdue, specifically not like Sackler pharmaceuticals or whatever, because like they didn't want
Yeah.
their name associated with the company because they knew what they were doing. So the Sackler family was deeply involved in the opioid crisis, specifically Richard Sackler being president of the Purdue Company from 1999 to 2003. And he had served on the board with 7 other family members. This family was like deeply involved in this company. And lawsuits indicated that Richard Sackler went with, as I said, to sales reps, to doctor's office pushing the drug. And when asked about the deaths as a result of the drug, he said, it could have been worse. Seemingly intentionally, almost like they have Camille Usher on their team. This man has been pretty scrubbed from the internet. He has not done any visual interviews. They only recently released his deposition when he was sued, when the company was sued, because it's not him that's sued, it's the company. So he didn't want to release the videos, and there's like one picture of his face that exists on the entire internet. They really are good at like PR and like hiding themselves from blame. So Sackler wrote that the blame was not on his company, but on the people the addicted to the medicine. And a lot of their marketing and PR was oriented around that. Is that it's like the people's problem. He's Madeline. You know what I mean? It's like they shouldn't be addicted to the drugs. Like, what do you mean?
They want it. We're just giving them what they want.
Yeah. So it's like if anyone's like, oh, Madeline Usher, you're saying some smart stuff, you must really love the Sackler family specifically.
They do. People do.
Yeah. But additionally concerning is every time they paid settlements for lawsuits to absolve themselves of their crimes, they did so under conditions that all evidence would be sealed and unavailable to the public, which would have flied pretty much in pre-internet times, but because of the internet and the way information spreads, we actually were able to get this information. Like there was an entire show about it. And that people were talking about it way more than they had before the internet. And the information about it was way harder to control because of how uncontrollable TikTok and things like the internet are. So we essentially see that the documents from these earlier trials, like in the 90s, were destroyed. So sometimes these documents were burned, and the Sackler family has also gone very out of the way to make sure videos and pictures of them would not be released. So on the Last Week Tonight Show, they had actors read the statements he made in court, which the deposition has later been released. But it was essentially they would have news reporters read his words, and it just wouldn't hit the same because it's like they're quoting someone. They're not actually seeing this gross old man say awful things.
Yeah.
So basically, Last Week Tonight hired actors to say literally his court transcripts, like his responses to the lawyers. And you can watch that on the sacklergallery.com, which they made for the show. But in recent years, the deposition video has been released, so you can watch the Sackler man, Richard Sackler, on the stand saying he doesn't know about 100 times to the crimes of the company, and acting just very unremorseful. I actually see the eldest Usher as similar to Richard Sackler, in their demeanor. It's just very much he is being fed lines by Arthur Prim and doesn't know anything, is claiming ignorance, and is because of that
deny.
Yeah, exactly. So another Sackler heir named David Sackler would be similar to Camille Usher in that he led PR and marketing to save the Sackler name. So they basically led all the smear campaigns against other addicts, as well as painting them as the victim in the situation. So very much like Camille, we have to humanize ourselves. We have to capitalize on these deaths. We really have to control the narrative. Sympathy is the best thing we could get from the public right now. And that's very much David Sackler, who basically published articles claiming that his children were getting bullied because people were telling their children that the family's work was killing people.
No, not them getting the truth.
And he went on to create a website called judgeforyourself.info that is dedicated entirely to proving the Sacklers' innocence. This website was pushed by David Sackler's wife, Joss Sackler, the goal being to argue for them being victims in the situation. We're just people,
We're just very rich, monstrous people.
Yeah, and it's like they are people, yeah, but they're also people who actively made bad choices to harm other people. Like just like Roderick, he's technically a person, but
Mhm.
he's out there making choices that will result in millions of bodies falling from the sky like rain.
And he didn't
So
care, right? Like
he didn't
he just cared that there was consequences and that they finally caught up
Yeah.
to him.
And it's like he just didn't love his kids enough till he had one grandbaby that reminded him of his dead wife. Like,
Yeah, you didn't love her then.
yeah,
When she's
literally.
like telling him like how he corrupted their children, like when she's a ghost. It's just like I felt so hard for her.
Yeah. And then like the sister is like, it's just an act. I always thought it was just an act. Like this is how you get your one up on people, but you're really like this. You're actually good. Ew. That's so much worse. And it's like, actually, babe, Madeline, you're the problem, actually. It's actually really sad how broken you are and that
It's
you
really
don't see that at
angering.
all. Yeah. So is there good news? Question mark. In an article titled Purdue Pharma Family Protected from Lawsuits in Exchange for Addiction Treatment Funding, they confirmed that a court ruled that the owners of Purdue Pharma, the Sackler family, will be protected from civil lawsuits linked to the opioid crisis in exchange for $6 billion settlement. $6 billion is definitely more than they had previously given, sure. But if we're really looking at how much wealth the Sackler family has, they had an $11 billion fortune. 11 minus 6. I'm not great at math.
And billion is still a lot. Like billion, like
yeah.
People need to remember that. Like people think a billion is like a billion. It's not. Billion's a disgusting amount of money that no small group of people should have. No one should be able to say we have $1 billion unless it's all of humanity.
And they still have 5 left.
Yes.
So additionally, the Sackler family did not receive any felony convictions. Only the company of Purdue did, which claimed bankruptcy. And so it's a company that can't serve jail time. So the Sackler family will not receive any felony convictions themselves or serve any jail time. Additionally, they still have $5 million left to do with whatever the heck they're going to do. And more enraging is there will be no personal responsibility for the Sackler family because they signed this deal that basically says, like, in the future, no matter what happens, we can't be sued again.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say the Sackler family, I do not believe is in charge of the fentanyl crisis. That's an entire different company. I believe that's INSYS that started that. That's an entire different situation taking place. Similar motivation, but I don't have like all the details on that. I think we should all, after this episode, maybe go read about that because that's what's happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
The oxycodone started it. They monopolized on that.
Yeah,
rolling rock. You know what I mean? They're like, oh, we saw how you did it. Let's do that too. But more enraging is, as I said, there's no personal responsibility at the Sackler family. But in the PBS interview, they continue that in total, drug manufacturers, pharmacies, and distributors have pledged around $54 billion to state, local, and tribal governments for their respective role in the opioid epidemic. And then there, you talk about the government that want to start addiction treatment programs or recovery housing. But at the same time, the way this money is moving forward and actually getting out to people is by protecting the Sackler family from any personal responsibility. The issue being that it is not guaranteed that the government parties will use this money in how it's intended as well, and that there's no consequence for these people that like murdered millions of people, either now or stole their futures, like went through time, as Flanagan said, and stole their futures, what they could have been. So they continue, and this is William Brigham from the PBS interview, and they said this is kind of like what the concern was back in the 90s when the big tobacco settlements happened too, that we don't know. We think that the money is going to the tobacco prevention and smoking cessation, but not always. And Anari Patani continued, like, yes, exactly. The most of that money didn't go to tobacco or anti-smoking programs at all. In fact, the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, which tracks it, says about 3% of the annual payout went to that. 3%? Yes, the rest of it has gone to everything you can imagine, like filling state budget gaps, transportation, paving roads, and filling potholes. In North Carolina and South Carolina, they actually used it to subsidize tobacco farmers. The one difference I will mention, though, is that tobacco settlement didn't have any requirements for the money to be spent on it. So sort of assume that because the money was coming because of the public health crisis caused by cigarettes, that it would be used for that. But it wasn't actually a legal requirement. In the opioid settlements, it does have that requirement that 85% of the money be spent on opioid remediation. And I think that there's a lot of questions about how that will be enforced, and that if that will really come true. But that clause was in there because people did not want to see it repeat. And I will say that's like really important, because it's hard to have faith that they're going to do what they're going to do correctly, because of what we've already witnessed happen, and because of the idea that like all these companies are owned by the same person. And if we like use what we saw from the three companies that were tasked by the FDA, Cardinal Health, McKesson, and AmerisourceBergen, in order to like monitor what was happening. Like, people are going to do stuff till they get caught. That's what rich people have taught me, is that people are going to do stuff till they get caught. And if they're not caught, there's not going to be consequences. And if you're telling me that this family, this company, like, yeah, they went bankrupt, sure, but these people still have $5 billion. That there's literally no real consequence for this entire family that is responsible for all these people dying. That there's not going to be another family that's like, oh, well, they didn't get consequences, we could do the same thing. We can make a bunch
and we can learn from their mistakes, so we don't owe anyone $6 billion.
Yes. And that's a really pessimistic outlook. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but it's also like thinking of the military budget and how they spend billions on pain creams for compounding pharmacy. That's another Last Week Tonight episode that I watched. They were proven to not work, and on their budgets, they haven't been audited because there are billions of dollars unaccounted for.
Yes.
Like, we know that people will people in power, unfortunately, will manipulate funding and wealth and power in order to benefit themselves, without any accountability, because there aren't Vernas. We need to be Verna. And if we're not being Verna, or we're not being Lenore, for example, or we're not being the wife who recovers and makes the nonprofit that helps all those people and like actually like is on the ground helping people, like, there's not going to be help. You know what I mean? So with policies like record sealing and not releasing information to these public, these situations are absolutely repeatable unless individuals stand up as a group together and say no. These things happen because of characters like the Usher family and like the real Sackler family, who did things for their own benefit without thinking about the rest of the world, thinking the rest of the world, the next generation, will have to deal with this, not me. In an individualistic nation where there's no collective, there's such division, it's hard to expect people to stand up for what is right in the way that we need. But I will say that we are seeing changes, thankful to things like social media and the internet. Apps like TikTok that share information to the public that otherwise would have been successfully swept under the rug. That's why things like TikTok ban are so dangerous, because they recognize that we see so much more than we used to, and that they cannot oppress us in the same ways that they used to before, because we are talking to each other. We are sharing the information at a rate that cannot be controlled. And that scares the rich so much that they want to take it away. This is also just my theory. The last thing I'll say about the lawsuit as a whole is I think the timing is important. This happened post 2020. And I don't have any proof of this. This is my theory. But because the government can only be supporting of a subservient workforce if they have one. And 2020 onward, we lost millions of people to the pandemic, and capitalism lost millions of workers. We also saw the rise of TikTok and people actually having the time to pay attention to what was happening around them. I think these two things are why they got caught. The government can only look away from an addictive substance as long as they are able to control it for their benefit. And once they lost millions of the workforce of the pandemic, they had to care more about those things that impacted their ability to work. the introduction of fentanyl is important here as well. Like an even stronger alternative to oxycodone was spreading like wildfire and killing and addicting even faster. And our younger generations aren't having kids at the rate that they want, all of which combines together into this different kind of perfect storm where they need to give the illusion of punishment and hope that this appeases people. And also, they want us to be mad about so many things that we can't organize ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Because like they're literally making all of the things, they're making the situation worse.
Yeah.
Ultimately.
And distracting us.
Trying to be like, aliens, look over here.
And like they're also really good at like reframing the narrative so that it looks like they're not impeding on our civil rights. Like all the time. Just like or just like our right to exist. They spin it so that it reflects back on us as being the problem, or that they're somehow helping, that they're the heroes. That's just, you know, to encourage people to sacrifice or to give up certain freedoms and rights for protection or the illusion of protection. Yeah. Just like classic MO.
And what they're seeing is like with stuff like TikTok, like that it's not working as well as it used to. Mm-hmm. Like people are catching on and realizing like, oh, hey, we're really being manipulated here. Like this isn't actually what they've been saying it's been this whole time. And it's a lot harder for them to sweep it over or sweep it under the rug in the same way. Because there's like so many content creators who are like, I see what you're trying to do, but no, like that's not what this is. This isn't what's happening. Like you're trying to spin the issue so that you look good, and it's not going to work because we have people paying attention to what you're doing, and we're going to talk about it right here. And that's why they want to get rid of it. And if they do, like we're going to see more Sackler families, we're going to see more Ushers, and it should make everyone really scared and mad.
Mm-hmm. You know, like they say, the revolution will not be televised, but it will be on TikTok.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, that's scary. And I work in public media, you know, the people's voice is my whole thing, and it is really strong. It's just not like, it's all about amplifying those voices and getting them out there, sharing that information, and just remembering that we are stronger together, and we do have the people power, that we do have that option. It's not impossible, right? It just looks different.
They want us to think it is. Yeah.
Yeah. They want to distract us, and they want to tell us it's us, that we're doing it. That's your fault that the environment and that this planet is crying.
No, it's the companies.
It isn't.
It's the billionaires' fault because they're the ones doing the most damage. We could recycle all we want, and they still dump it in the ocean. We don't do that. They do.
They still send their labor somewhere else where they can't be regulated.
Yep.
And then they say it's our fault that we don't have jobs.
We don't want to work anymore, Gabe. What do you mean?
Yeah, nobody wants to work anymore.
No one ever wanted to work. Fun fact.
Yeah, fun fact. Work sucks.
Yeah.
So, thank you, Kat.
I'll try to like put some resources in there because like I don't want it to land on such a depressing note. Though the uplifting note is that like we are making progress. Like the boycotts are working. People are like realizing people have power. Mm-hmm. So keep doing that, and I'll see if I can find some like resources on like what the heck we could be doing to share retroactively. Yeah,
we will share. It'll be in show notes and in the blog. Yeah, and that like, you know, that again, it's a part of why I'm so appreciative of having done this Flanagan series, because like at first I was like, okay, it's because I had fun watching these shows, and there was, you know, again, the classic horror nerd in me was geeking out about the different shows and, you know, connecting to. And I think in our rewatch of a lot of the content, I was like, wow, there's this whole other conversation that keeps happening, or like he's weaving in this entertainment and like this outcry, and also just like having conversations about what it means to be a human, to be a person, and to live like in all the complexity that is. And I think he's done a really beautiful job in all the ways that he has covered these topics, and in the different ways that he has aesthetically. They're really beautiful and engaging. He really encompasses like the horror genre in what we're often trying to like tell people about it, because people just think like slasher, and this kind of feels like a slasher because we're killing
There's
people off every episode. Like the numbers are dwindling, and it is a Shakespearean tragedy. Everyone's dead. And I think that's really fun. But then it's like you're sitting there, especially this one. I feel like he really was like, I'm not even pretending. Like it was so like all of it was so obvious, and I can see how some people might be like not like it because it was so obvious. But I appreciate it because I think some people need that. Not all of us are as cognizant of these issues, and it sometimes just take like a big thing like seeing those bodies fall and pile up to go, oh yeah, right,
yeah,
that's happening, and also to like maybe it has you think or rethink how you feel about people that you encounter who are addicted and have that challenge of their lives. Like consider how they got here and all of the obstacles in their way towards getting better. It's just like humanizing an issue that, like, I think once you see how the narrative has been weaponized against them to make them the bad guy when they're actively suffering, whatever the issue is, like whether that's people who are addicted, people who are unhoused, people who look different, poor people, like all of the others that exist, the outliers, the real like victims or people who are victims of circumstance are portrayed as like, you did this to yourself, look at you.
And that's like it's not the case. It's a coping mechanism for a very unfair society. Like therapy, it's hard to be a therapist because literally a lot of the things people are anxious about are valid. You can't be like, that's irrational that you don't want to, you're scared you might lose your job and your housing, because it's a very real threat that everyone has all the time. So like, it's frustrating because, yeah, as you said, like they portray them as if they're these monsters or that they did it to themselves. And literally anyone could be in their position at any point. It's literally just like 3 bad things happening at the same time that could put you in those shoes.
It's like one missed paycheck. Yeah. Could really could unhouse you. Yeah, there's a lot. Yeah. So, yeah. So that's our Flanagan episode, our series. I think we covered a lot, just like he covered a lot. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned some things. I hope you enjoy his work as well. Give him some credit. I maybe just give credit to the horror genre for doing that. Because, like, again, all the things that he's working on, like, are built upon, like, this foundation that was already there from people who've been saying similar issues, right? Yeah. Like, Poe talking about the elite partying it up during a literal plague in 1839 or whatever.
And they were partying it up.
Happened in 2020. Like, that to me is like, it's insane. It's sick. What is it? What is the circle? Cyclical. Thank you. It was like circular. Yeah. I was like, that's not it. Cyclical. Yeah. So, yeah. I think I was abstained from my top. I will say I do think it's hard. I think because they all have different things that I really appreciate from them. So it's like I don't really have, like, I'd have to make like a whole like point system.
Yeah. To judge.
I just think they all serve different purposes, and so they're all brilliant to serve the purpose that they set out to do.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, everyone. I don't have an answer. I will say, top, like up there, really, Midnight Mass blew me away. And Hill House still really has some heartbreaking stuff. I think it's similar to you, Kat, where it's like Hill House and Usher are kind of tied.
Yeah, they were tied for me.
Yeah.
Midnight Mouse is at the top.
Yeah.
And then Bly was at the bottom. I don't know how to classify the other one because I didn't finish it, so I would want to rewatch it from start to finish and then give it a proper slotting. But I remember it being good. It was just like, it was kids like going through really hard things instead of adults going through really hard things. So it was a different framing.
Yeah. And a lot of characters from there are in Usher. So, like Perry, The wife, what was her name?
Oh yeah, she isn't it.
Yeah, and then obviously one of the assistants of Camille, like they out there. He be keeping people. So shout out Flanagan. We'll be starting a new series soon. Ghouls are going bi-weekly after this. We're gonna try to, give ourselves more time to really dive into issues so that like you can have more episodes like this where we can dive in and unpack content and feel good about what we're putting out there and researching and helping.
It gives us more intentionality because it's like hard to do this week to week where you have to read so many things. And it's like even this episode, I wish we had more time. So it'll be really helpful in making sure that like we cover things as thoughtfully as possible because we won't be rushing.
Yeah, like there's like a whole conversation that I was like, we could have had so many different conversations about like animal testing on like the whole Telltale Heart episode and the rush and the manipulation of the people who are a part of that. Like every little thing, or even just like Frederick and his treatment of his wife. Like there's so many levels of like every episode was kind of touching on a different issue. We just don't got the time. I was like, we could have went episode by episode.
Yeah,
we could have been like, let's teach you.
I could have said even more. Ultimately, I feel like I said a lot, so there's a lot we could have covered.
Which is a good thing. It's a good sign. But hope you enjoyed it. This is a long one, but well worth it, I think. I really appreciated what you brought, Kat.
Me too.
And don't get married.
Delete your kids, or your kids will be sacrificed by your choices.
I can't get over the fact that he made that deal and he had 2 alive children.
Yeah.
Like, even if you don't think it's real, you just don't, like, manifestation is real. You do not say those words. You don't put that out in the world. Like, that already was like, he is villain. He's evil. Yeah. I was like, ain't no real human with a capacity for care for their family could do that.
Yeah.
You couldn't say that stuff. You could not be.
It's because the whole thing was that she was saying, like, isn't it better? It's like kind of rationalizing the whole Hill House thing where it's like, isn't it better for them to have a few years of really good time than a lifetime of suffering? And it's like, no. The answer is no. You might have thought you knew it wasn't the right choice and you may have convinced yourself in order to like rationalize it that it was the right thing to do, but it was not. And that's what people do. They robbed them. They robbed those people of their lives. You reached through time.
And stole who they could have been. Truly did. Yeah. Okay. It does too. Always. You be saying stuff. I'm like, I can't breathe.
Yeah.
Well, bye.
Bye.
Rate us on the internet, please. Send us a review.
Positively, please.
Yes, a positive review. Thank you.